Hello, my name is Dalton, and welcome to the first episode of Are You Scared Yet? A horror podcast that is going to feature me yelling at a microphone about horror movies. A bunch of my friends in the area where I live have been making horror movie podcasts, and I figured, hey, why don't I jump on the bandwagon? I listen to a lot of them, I enjoy a lot of them. The Horror Inside with my friend Dylan. And his brother makes one called The Horror of It All, both very good. And then I decided, hey, let's get a microphone and start recording myself. Also, I've been listening to 22 Shots of Moods and Horror for like years, and they're also very good. But the thing about them is they have multiple people, so there's not usually large sections of silence. But thankfully, I know how to edit audio if I end up stumbling over words too much or not being able to say anything. So for the first 2 or 3 episodes, I was gonna do a few top tens so listeners could get like an idea of where my opinions of the horror genre are. So for like episode 1, just a normal top 10 across the board of all time. Episode 2 is going to be, due to the fact that I'm starting this up around New Year, New Decade. Episode 2 is going to be the top 10 of last decade combined with the top 10 of last year. So the decade of the 2010s and the year of 2019. And then episode 3, take a break from movies and just talk about the top 10 best horror video games ever made, in my opinion. So starting out my list is going to be from 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is in my opinion, one of the greatest horror remakes ever made. John Carpenter does an excellent job with creating a alien that can make itself look as if it is a human being or anything else. The practical effects in the movie are amazing. Kurt Russell is phenomenal in it. As someone who grew up in the 2000s, seeing Wilford Brimley as someone who is not just making commercials about diabetes is very hilarious when I realized who it was in that role. And then you just have all of the practical effects of the film, like the dog, the man whose head falls off and then scurries away like a spider, a torso opening up to reveal a mouth and taking off someone's forearms, the petri dish scene, and then the ambiguous ending where you're not sure if they've defeated the alien yet, or if one of them is still the alien. I've heard a lot of theories about it. I just like to leave it at I don't know who it could be. I don't know if either of them are human. Just leave it ambiguous. It just feels better for me. But I really like it. Obviously, it's in my top 10 is number 10. And then to continue down the list, number 9 is Martyrs from 2008 by Pascal Lage, French name I can't pronounce. So Martyrs is one of the French extreme films from around that time. I believe there was a what some people would refer to as the Fab Five of French extreme films. So with Martyrs, you have the first half, which is a home invasion film where you don't really know anything that's going on for a while. And it's just so brutal. Just this woman walking into this family's house and blowing him away with a shotgun, chasing him around. Clearly, she believes they've done something wrong to her. We don't know what it is yet, but then it just keeps going from there. And then once you get to the halfway point, it's a completely different movie. It's just such a good film about what happens after you die. Is there anything? It just gets really, really bleak about the afterlife. I can't really say anything else than that, other than that, if you haven't seen it yet, and that might even be giving too much of it away. But it is definitely a movie that I recommend that everyone see at least once in their life. I feel like it's just a very important story. It is brutal, but like you should sit through it at least once. Coming in at number 8 is from 1982, directed by George A. Romero and written by Stephen King, the greatest anthology film ever made, in my opinion, Creepshow. So basically for this, I was just gonna label off my least favorite to favorite short. My least favorite is still amazing, in my opinion. It's just not as good As the other ones, for that, it's going to go They're Creeping Up on You. I do really like it. I'm just not that big a fan of bug horror for the most part. It doesn't scare me that much. I do really like the effect they do of all the cockroaches crawling out of the body at the end of it, and just how much of an asshole this man is to everyone. I thought that was really funny. And then something to tide you over. I do love Liam Neeson and Ted Danson being in a very serious-ish role. It does get kind of campy at the end when you have Liam Neeson yelling, "I can hold my breath for a really long time," at absolutely nothing. Then Father's Day, which the dance scene is hilariously bad. It's so 80s. I love it. And then you have when, was it Bedelia? At the grave site, and just gets destroyed and decapitated, and at least he got his cake finally. Then my two favorites, The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, which I absolutely love. Stephen King's acting in that. I feel like he's the only person that could have played that character ever. He did such a good job of just being this stupid white trash character that I just love so much. Just all the things he says are always so quotable. Like his meteor shit thing, or when he opens up his pants and yells, "Not down there," and then just drinking himself into a stupor and then shooting himself. I absolutely love it. And then my favorite short of the whole film is The Crate. I absolutely love The Crate. The man who hates his wife because she's an alcoholic and loud and mean to him, having daydreams about killing her in front of people and having them just applaud him, and then finally finding a way to solve his problem in a monster that they find in a crate at the school he works in. It's just so funny. The monster looks horrifying. The first time I watched this movie, I was actually scared of it. Like, now looking back, it's not very terrifying. He looks kind of fluffy. I also, the final, when he's feeding his wife to this monster and he just says, "Just tell him to call you Billy, everyone else does," calling back to how she introduces herself to everyone. It's just so silly, like the rest of the movie is. And then the wraparound story with Tom Atkins being a shitty dad and just not liking horror comics. The whole movie is just a certain kind of hilarious, and I absolutely love it. Number 7 is from 1978, the start of my favorite slasher franchise ever, also directed by John Carpenter, Halloween. Michael Myers is my favorite slasher movie villain, just the embodiment of everything that is evil, a great boogeyman. Donald Pleasance does an amazing job at playing Dr. Loomis, and Jamie Lee Curtis plays an amazing final girl as Laurie Strode. I just feel like there's nothing I can say about this movie that hasn't already been said, so there's not really a point going into it. I just think that, again, Donald Pleasance, I feel like he's criminally underrated as an actor. He does such a good job in that movie. Like, everything he says is either, like, convincing that, oh shit, Michael Myers is terrifying and he should be stopped, or just hilarious, no matter what it is. Like, when Michael drives a car, and it's like, how could he drive a car? So Donald Pleasance just comes up with, well, maybe someone gave him lessons. And then just his whole acting of that character is like that, and I love it. Like, the whole movie is just amazing. I have the whole Halloween collection on Blu-ray. I got it signed by Nick Castle. It's one of my favorite things I own. And then even going to watch the newest one, I still love it. Like, the newest one that just came out in, I want to say 2018, I still loved it as a movie. I love the whole franchise. Even Halloween Resurrection, I have a fondness for. I understand it's stupid, but, like, Buster Rhymes roundhouse kicks Michael Myers through a fucking wall and yells "trick or treat, motherfucker." Like, there's nothing that I can think of more hilarious and completely miscast than that. Coming in at number 6 from 1968, directed by George A. Romero, Night of the Living Dead. Now, I feel like this is another one that everything about it has already been said before. There's no point in me going into it that much, but it's just such a great movie. I typically am not the biggest fan of black and white films. It takes a bit for me to get into them sometimes. But with that one, everything just looks so nice on it. The set pieces, the gore, the zombies themselves, the people, the relationships between the people are just so good in that movie. No one really trusts anyone, but they all have to help each other eventually. And then just, especially with the rest of the series, every single one has a metaphor for what the zombies stand for. And it's just, I really like the whole series, but Night of the Living Dead is my favorite. And then just the ending of one of them survived, but now he's dead because he just got a fucking bullet put between his eyes, and they just say, okay, that's another one for the fire. Like, it's another bleak ending, and typically I really like bleak endings, apparently. And coming in at number 5 from 2018, Hereditary, directed by Ari Aster. I think that as far as modern horror directors go, Ari Aster is an up-and-coming master. Obviously, Hereditary is one of my favorite movies ever. And then Midsommar is also just amazing. The only thing I'm waiting for is I'd really like it if he could make a full film that is not just a cult movie like his first two. I have seen his a few of his short films. I know he has a lot of ideas that he can go off of, but Hereditary is just such a good portrait of grief and loss of a family member and what it can do to people. I'll typically recommend it to people and tell them to message me up or call me when the scene happens, and they kind of just look at me confused, but then the moment it happens, I'll get a phone call of them yelling at me, and then I'll be like, yeah, but it's good, right? And they're like, yeah, no, I love this movie, but I just didn't see that coming. And I'm like, no one ever sees that coming. That's not something that typically happens in any other movie. Typical movies wouldn't do that. And then when I hang up the phone, I tell them, call me again at the end. And again, they call me again at the end, just as confused as they were beforehand. But I don't want to give too much away about Hereditary for people who haven't seen it yet. Even calling it a cult movie probably gives too much of it away. But I will say that Ari Aster is a name to look out for in the near future. And even the 2 movies he already has out now are must-watches, in my opinion. Coming in at number 4 is directed by John Eric Dowdle from 2007, The Poughkeepsie Tapes. So The Poughkeepsie Tapes is a true crime mockumentary about a fake serial killer in Poughkeepsie, New York. Now, the first time I saw it, I wasn't aware of if it was fake or real or what, because I stumbled upon it on the internet. It hadn't officially come out yet, and I thought I had found a unreleased documentary about a serial killer that hadn't been caught yet. So I was terrified. Upon further investigation, I found out that it was just a movie that hadn't been fully released yet. It had been shown in like film festivals and whatnot. I believe 2000. Wait, I already said 2008 is when it came out, but it wasn't officially released until I believe like 2017. So the day it was released, I went to the store and picked up a copy of it. It's just such a disturbing movie. It doesn't hold any punches. It gets to the point where he's filming one of his victims. He keeps her alive. She ends up getting Stockholm Syndrome. She just falls madly in love with him because she's been kidnapped by him, and he just convinces her that like she's his slave and that she's supposed to do everything he wants. So at the end of the movie, she's being filmed. She's a broken woman, and it's never been mentioned in the whole film before. She just lifts up her arm and her hand is missing, and every time I watched it, it would just make me jump. It is the second best jump scare I've ever seen in my entire life without really being a jump scare, because it doesn't have that that little musical sting at the end of it. But essentially, it's just man in Poughkeepsie, New York, is making films of him killing people and his day-to-day life, and the interviews of the police and the family of the victims. It feels really real, and at points you feel dirty for what's happening. But if you can handle it, I'd say watch it. There are a few scenes that you will never be able to unsee, such as when he's wearing a mask on the front of his face and on the back of his head and walking on all fours towards one of his victims to shove needles into her neck. That is typically the scene I show people first before they watch the movie to see if they'd be actually able to continue watching it. But other than that, I've seen this movie probably 10 times. I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm very glad it finally got a Blu-ray release so that it's easier for me to actually talk to people about it and show it to them. Thankfully, even after this movie, the people who made it continued to have bigger careers outside of it. I would need to put more research into what they were doing, but I do know that they did have more stuff they were doing aside from this afterwards. Number 3 from 1987, directed by Clive Barker, is Hellraiser. I recently rewatched this movie a few days ago. I still love it. The whole married couple moving into a new house that is somehow haunted by the husband's brother Frank, who has slept with his wife but is brought back to life by his brother's blood and has been being tormented by Cenobites for however long. It's just such a silly concept, but it works so well. And I discovered this movie in high school. I've been watching it at least once a year ever since. I recently watched the Joe Bob Briggs episode of it, and I love that too. But just all of the makeup effects in it are so cool looking. When Frank finally gets torn apart at the end of it, and in the beginning, by the chains, and then just that weird homeless man that eats fucking crickets and becomes a winged skeletal demon at the end of it to take the box away and give it back to the weird Asian guy who happens to have the box for some reason to give to people so that they can also achieve finding the Cenobites. It's just such a weird movie, and I absolutely love it. And then it's based on the Clive Barker novella, The Hellbound Heart, which is also one of my favorite stories written by him. But it's a lot different, and every time the subject comes up on the internet of people talking about a new one, like a Hellraiser reboot, I keep seeing that they're trying to make it more faithful to the original book, and I feel like that would be a very interesting concept because of how different the book is. You wouldn't need Pinhead anymore, so not having Doug Bradley in it wouldn't be as much of a problem as it has been with the last two movies, because Pinhead's not even in it. The lead Cenobite is a female, and it's way more, the book is a lot more explicit than the movies are. Because in the movies, at least to me, it seems like for the most part, the box takes you to, they say it's a world of pleasure and pain beyond your wildest imagination, but it seems more like pain. With the book, it seems a lot more like, okay, like, everyone's naked and they're probably screwing the Cenobites, but it's still probably severely painful for them. So I feel like it would be really interesting for them to make a movie that's based more on the Hellbound Heart than on just rebooting the Hellraiser series in general. But I don't know if it's ever going to happen, just with how everything else with the series has been. Like, the first three movies, the first one is a classic, the second one is really good, the third one is okay, and then after that it becomes kind of laughable. Like, you end up with Pinhead in space, two movies in which the end is they were dead the whole time, that's the twist, and a movie that is putting Pinhead into a massive online game and teenagers on an island so that they are cannon fodder for some killer. Like, I've heard that these movies were written and then had the Hellraiser logo, the Hellraiser story just shoved into it for no reason. I'm not sure about the newest two. I haven't seen them yet because I've heard they're not that great, but at least the first one is still a classic, and I can try to look forward to the Hellbound Heart being made into a movie. And then coming in at number 2, we have from 1959, directed by William Castle, the original House on Haunted Hill. Again, not the biggest fan of black and white movies, but there's just something about this one that is just so much fun. I saw it when I was a young child, and it terrified me. And then a few years later, I was just like, why was this scary to me? I mean, I still love it, obviously, because it's number 2. I'll still watch it to this day. But like when I was a kid, the lady floating away on the floor was scary. Now it's funny and it looks cheesy. The skeleton coming out of the vat of acid was scary. Now I can see the strings, the hands attacking people and trying to get them to silence themselves from screaming. Vincent Price is phenomenal in it. The whole thing is just so much cheesy fun. Like, even the ending is just like, they're dead and you're next. They'll be coming for you. Like, it's just such a B movie that, like, shouldn't be scary to anyone. And it isn't to me anymore, but I still enjoy the hell out of it. And then, before I reveal my number 1, I wanted to mention a few honorable mentions. I'm just going to mention them as names, just in case they end up being on a later episode. So for my honorable mentions, I have High Tension, a Serbian film, American Mary, The Changeling, Dead End, Jason X, Fear Inc., Midsommar, Session 9, and The Mutilator. All of those movies are good in their own ways, but not quite good enough, in my opinion, to have them on the top 10 list. And then my number 1 favorite horror movie of all time, directed by William Peter Blatty, from 1990, starring George C. Scott, Ed Flanders, and Brad Dourif, The Exorcist 3. Now, when I see other people make lists, The Exorcist is typically on there. I do love the first Exorcist film. It is a great movie. But there's something about The Exorcist 3 that I just love it so much more. You've got George C. Scott as the detective. Just, maybe it's overacting. Maybe it's just him. Ed Flanders as Father Dyer, his best friend, and then Brad Dourif in the frickin' role of his goddamn life, playing the Gemini killer, just switching from talking calmly and opera singing to screaming about who's going to be next. Meanwhile, he's in a straitjacket chained to a wall. But he still ends up being so horrifying. And just the relationship between George C. Scott's character and Father Dyer is just so believable, that they're just these two old men who have been friends for a really long time. And they know each other so much they can just joke around. And then once Father Dyer eventually gets killed off, just the torment in George C. Scott's character's eyes is just very believable. And just everyone else in the movie, everything else about it, like my actual favorite jump scare is in this film, where it's just a long shot of a hallway and a nurse going about her duties, and then at the end of it she goes through a hallway on the left, comes back out through that hallway, and then there's just a man behind her that you hadn't seen before. And then that one actually does have that little musical sting to indicate that this is a jump scare, but it comes out of nowhere. I didn't see it coming the first time I watched it. It still gets me to this day. And just, this movie is just so good, and I wish more people would give it a chance. The Exorcist is still a classic in my opinion. I just like this one a lot more than the first one, just because George C. Scott, again, is amazing, and Brad Dourif is absolutely horrifying as the Gemini killer. Okay, so that is going to be the end of episode 1 of Are You Scared Yet? Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next week for the top 10 of the last decade and top 10 of 2019.